I have a secret. I'm over 50. I guess that means I'm not 40 anymore. And I'm going to embrace that here on YouTube from now on. I'm going to talk to people about my journey making content, art, whatever it is that you want to call it, over the past 52 years and tell you ultimately how I got here. My goal in this video is to tell you, whether you're over 40 or not, you're thinking about making YouTube videos or not, to tell you how it is that I, over 50 years old, got to the place where I make my living on YouTube and still have a long way to go to build my YouTube empire. So I just figured I would talk to you as I sit here charging my car, Volkswagen ID4 2021 first edition model. I'm talking to you on the Insta360 X4, which Insta360 sent to me a while back, and I just haven't had a chance to make a video about it, so I figured this was the best time. I had a mount that I could put in my car, so I'm mounted, and I'm gonna make this video talking about all this stuff, and this is what I'm gonna do. So this is kind of my life story as a creator. I don't know how else to best sort of frame it. It's a long story, so if you have something else that you want to do and just listen to this like a bedtime story or a podcast or whatever it is that you want to call it, that's what this is. So I was born in 1971, October 1971, October 25th, 1971 in Wheeling, West Virginia. As far as I know, in a Florence Crittenden home for unwed mothers. My mother was 19 when I was born. She gave me up for adoption. I was adopted by the parents that raised me, which is a whole other conversation that we could have at some time, but it's not entirely germane to this conversation. It impacts this conversation, but not directly. I spent a lot of time when I was a kid wondering why I could do all these artistic things and no one else in my family could do them, but that didn't stop me from doing them. When I was 3 years old, my mother always said that I was always wanted attention. So maybe that's the end of the story there. I've always wanted attention. End of story. But one thing that we did when I was probably 3 years old or a little bit older, we got a brand new car. It was a 1974 Chevy Nova, I believe, maybe a 75. I can't remember exactly. And it had an 8-track cassette player in it. And it came with a cassette from the factory. It's more to explain than is probably necessary here, but we had a factory 8-track cassette player, and it had all kinds of different songs. You know, Lawrence Welk was on there and all kinds of different stuff, but they also had, They Call the Wind Mariah, which is from the musical Paint Your Wagon, which in the film version was performed by Mr. Clint Eastwood, which to me, now that I know that, seems very strange, but I learned to sing that song all the way through. Loved that song. And then I learned to sing, of course, Take Me Home Country Roads, because I was born in West Virginia. And that song was released in 1971, I believe. And so it's still like the unofficial state song of West Virginia. I learned to sing that song, and my parents would take me to family gatherings, and in between the pasta salad and the jelly salads and the hamburgers and the hot dogs and the collard greens and all the other things that they had there. Potato salad was a big one, German and whatever other kind there is. I've never been a big fan of the mayonnaise salads myself. I don't know about you. But anyway, at some point after the meal, they would trot me up in front of the buffet there and they would have me sing songs. So I started singing songs for my family when I was 3, and then my parents split up when I was about 8. And one thing that I can say for my mom is that she always, even though she didn't do these things herself, she didn't really have a musical bent to her. She always found a way to find me something to get involved in that was my thing. And so she found a university children's choir. It was a children's choir that was being directed by some university students who were, of course, in the musical education program, where I would one day end up taking classes. More on that later. But they had this musical theater. I remember one of the songs that we sang was, Annie was a big hit around that time, so we sang some Annie songs. I remember the first time that I ever went on stage with this group. It was at the big concert hall, and there were tons and tons, hundreds of seats out there. But the one thing that I can remember is that when I walked out on stage with the rest of the choir, I couldn't see anybody beyond the first couple of rows. It was just like the lights and then a couple of rows of hazy people, and it was another world where, once we started singing, once we started doing the thing, it was incredible. I was nervous, but I wasn't scared, if that makes any sense. I was kind of a weird kid, I guess, in the sense that I got asked out of my first grade elementary school, the neighborhood school that was near my house. Went to first grade. I was what they would call hyperactive, I guess. At this time, hyperactive was what they probably called kids who would have ADHD or something like that now. I just was a handful to control, I suppose, and so my teachers wanted me to go to a school that had fewer students, and so they sent me to the elementary school that was downtown. It was called Central Elementary because it's downtown. It was an interesting experience. I went from a class of probably like 25 to 30 students to, I think, 12 or 13 students. Much more diverse. Lots of students whose parents were graduate students at the time and going to the university or something like that, or students who came from other areas of town. In the 70s in Morgantown, West Virginia, it was still not quite as diverse as one might think. So I got to be around a lot of different kinds of people, and I think that was a net benefit for me. As I said, my two real strong memories from elementary school are placing second in the spelling bee in like third grade, I think it was, and my dad got injured in a power plant explosion. The power plant where he worked exploded somehow, and he was in one of the power plant smokestacks. He fell down a couple of flights of catwalk and hurt his back, and he was in the hospital. And my mom came to pick me up in our light blue, baby blue Chevy station wagon that we had at the time, and I just remember her being panicked, just absolutely out of her mind. And I didn't quite understand what was going on. My dad was in the hospital. I don't think he was seriously injured, although he lost his sense of smell. And I think really my dad had some undiagnosed post-traumatic stress from that. And then he died of metastatic cancer in 2003 at 60. And I believe that started with the asbestos that he was exposed to in that explosion. But of course, he and probably most everybody else who worked at that place at that time signed a form for a settlement that wasn't enough money to not be able to sue them if, in fact, they got sick. So that was it. But not long after that, my parents split up. My mom went back to work eventually, and I became what was affectionately known at the time as a latchkey kid. And I was the older brother, so I was kind of responsible for taking care of myself and my brother until my mom got home a couple hours after we got home from school. I think we got out of school around 2:30, and then she got home from work after 5. So we had the television to keep us company, and I remember watching General Hospital, Luke and Laura, and their whole shebang, and then Luke's disappearance and supposed death. I don't know. My favorite band at the moment was Kiss. I had dressed up as Peter Criss, the drummer from Kiss, for Halloween the previous year. We got some white makeup, and the only way we could do the stripes for the cat's eyes was we burn a cork and rub the burnt cork in stripes on my face. It was a different time. There were no Spirit of Halloweens back in the day. So I was a huge Kiss fan. I had Kiss dolls, but then a station out of Pittsburgh, WPGH, I believe it is. It was now a Fox station, but at the time it was just kind of an independent station out of Pittsburgh. It started playing Beatles cartoons. These were cartoons that I found out later were, in the mid-'60s for a couple of years. The Beatles licensed their likenesses and their music to a Saturday morning cartoon show. I had never heard anything like the Beatles. I remember the first Beatles song that I heard was I've Just Seen a Face. And just the energy of that song and the harmonies grabbed me somehow. And the Beatles became my entire life for most of my youth. And still to this day, I am a Beatles fan first and a music fan of everything else second. I probably have spent so many hours studying the Beatles. If there were a Beatles degree, I could have one. But alas, there is not. My dad bought me a red and black Sunburst guitar from Lowe's. It was a piece of garbage, but it was my piece of garbage. And my dad wanted me to play an instrument. He was a big fan of outlaw country music, Waylon and Willie and the Boys. And so when I saw this guitar and I fell in love with it, I just wanted to have that guitar. My dad ultimately got it for me. Somehow, I don't remember what the situation was. It wasn't super expensive. And then I started taking guitar lessons and trying to learn songs. I wanted to learn Beatles songs, but Beatles songs, if you don't know this, Beatles songs are deceptively difficult to play on guitar, especially if you're 7 or 8 years old and you've got tiny fingers. I remember my life in phases. The next phase was like the awkward junior high phase where I had a peach-colored JCPenney Fox polo knockoff, which, we couldn't afford a polo. But we could afford the JCPenney Fox polo, and I don't know. Junior high kids probably still suffer to this day with having to meet up with the latest fashions and all that kind of thing. But everybody had to have a polo shirt. I got my 7th grade school picture taken in that polo shirt. And imagine a buck-toothed, curly-haired me without glasses wearing a peach-colored polo shirt. That wasn't polo. I later got parachute pants, because that was around the time that breakdancing became a big thing. The movie Breakin' came to the theater. I fell in love with that movie so much. Breakdancing was so cool, and I got into Fat Boys, Grandmaster Flash. Suddenly, like the Beatles were still there, but then there was also Fat Boys, Grandmaster Slash, Run DMC, all that kind of stuff. Just, I don't know. It was a very weird time. And around the same time, when I got into junior high, later on, Michael Jackson's Thriller came out. I bought that album on every media possible. I had a cassette, I had the record, I had the 8-track. Maybe they made it reel to reel. I didn't have that, but you know how it is. I just devoured that record. And then I remember in 7th or 8th grade discovering Prince. This was 1999, right before Prince came out with Purple Rain the next summer. And the record bar in our local mall had a Prince t-shirt, purple, with the album art from 1999 on it and the lyrics to the song on the back. And they also sold little thin leather ties. So they had the purple t-shirt, the thin leather tie. And that was my first foray into being different than other kids. Like, I had that shirt, tie with no collar, just the t-shirt, and I'd gone to Hill's department store and found some slacks. I guess you could only call them slacks. They're kind of halfway between sweatpants and halfway between pants with a white stripe down the side, and they were purple. I had some Chuck Taylors. That was my outfit. I don't know how many times I wore that outfit, but I know that I continued my outcast ways with that. I was also in choir, of course. Junior high school at the time, being good at singing and being in the choir and kind of being one of the better singers in the choir was not cool. I feel like it got cooler as the years went on, but at that time it was not cool. And I desperately wanted to be part of the popular clique. Never happened. Well, maybe it happened. I don't know. But I was ridiculed quite a bit until 9th grade when it started to change. And I don't know, I met a good friend. His name was Dan. But we kind of bonded over being different than everybody else. And that was the beginning of my sort of next phase, which was to go into high school. And my goal was to become the best singer in my high school. And not to be too modest about it, I was the best singer in my high school. I got the lead in 2 musicals, Brigadoon and No No Nanette. Actually, my No No Nanette part was a big part, but not the lead, the love interest lead. I sang solos. I placed 2nd in the solo competition for show choirs in the state. I didn't get first, and this other girl got first because I closed my eyes when I sang. We sang Naturally by Huey Lewis from the Sports album, and I love that song. It's kind of a doo-wop thing. If you haven't heard it, go listen to it on Spotify. Maybe I'll link it down in the description. Naturally by Huey Lewis was the big sort of guy song. We had a guy and a girl song that year in our show choir show, and so I sang the lead in that. I was in all-state choir all of the years I was in high school. I was in a national choir after high school that toured Europe, and also in high school I got into my first band called Vital Signs, and we played, I mean, you can imagine what it is. I mean, it's Vital Signs, very well-known Rush song at the time, but we played all kinds of different stuff. The other guys in the band were juniors and seniors, and I had gone to band camp that year singing all the time, got attention from those guys, and tried to get girls by doing that. It was a different time. And by the end of the summer, these guys asked me to be in the band. They needed a singer, and our set list included Melt With You by Modern English, 40 by U2, as well as our big show-ending song, Stairway to Heaven. If you know anything about being in bands, like, there are just certain songs that you don't cover. But that was our big song. We were the only ones that did it. I remember the first time I got on stage to play a show where I was the front man. It was an event called Coal Aid, C-O-A-L, Coal Aid, at the high school auditorium. It was a benefit for striking coal miners. There was a food drive, bring canned foods and non-perishables, and pay $5, whatever it was, to get in. Everything went to charity, and they had, I think, 5 bands on the bill. My band was one of them. I remember being so nervous before we went on that I had like a large bout of diarrhea about 20 minutes before we went on stage, which, yeah, that's good. That's always good. That's better before than during, I suppose. And then I was hooked. Then I just had to be in bands. And the band that I was in at the time didn't write their own songs, and I wanted to write my own songs. So I just started writing my own songs at home by myself. I wasn't much of a guitar player at that time. I could sing a lot better than I could play guitar, so I never really focused on guitar then. And so I wrote lyrics. I remember the first lyrics that I wrote were kind of in my head to the tune of a Police song. I don't think they ended up sounding that way when I eventually married them to a piece of music, but that was the inspiration in my head. Forget what Police song was, though. It's off Synchronicity. I remember that, but I don't remember which songs. Anyway, got into my first real band. It wasn't really a band. 1 acoustic guitarist, 2 singers. Started out as 1 acoustic guitar and me singing. Very sort of Michael Hedges-y, very like punk / Michael Hedges acoustic guitar with me singing. It's very difficult to explain. Band was called Reflexive Repetition, which is a terrible band name, but that's what we called ourselves. We found it in the index of my English book. The 2 words were next to each other in the index of my English book, so we called ourselves Reflexive Repetition. I was in that band from junior year of high school all the way through probably my sophomore year of college, and we made a couple of cassettes and played around the tri-state area as much as we could. I remember playing at a roller rink in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, and we played at the Empty Glass in Charleston, West Virginia, and I forget what venue in Athens, Ohio, and of course every venue that we could get into in Morgantown. When I started college, I started as a voice major and got a scholarship for voice. I wanted to go to the Berklee College of Music and applied late, got accepted. There was going to be some sort of scholarship package, but deferred until the next year. So instead of taking a year off of college, my choir director, who was one of my favorite people in the world, who passed away the next year, again, another long story that I will happily tell one of these days. Well, not happily, but I will tell, because it was a big moment in my life. But he and my voice teacher at the university convinced me to audition for a scholarship at West Virginia. I got a scholarship at West Virginia University, grew up in Morgantown, and so I went to West Virginia, and I was a voice major. And I didn't like being in the music department. I didn't like being a music major. I didn't like music theory because I had never really learned it, and it was very difficult for me because I had a better ear than I did an eye. I could not read music as fast as I could hear it, so I never really got good at reading music. And I was ready to be done with that. And my English teacher, the TA, said, "Hey, Jason, have you ever thought about being an English major?" And I never had because I'd never had a good experience doing that. But that was the beginning of me writing things other than songs. I took every poetry writing course, every fiction writing course, everything that I could get my hands on. By the time I got done with college, I had more credits than I needed to graduate, but not enough credits in things that counted toward what I needed to graduate. Around that time, I had also met the woman who would become my wife, who is still my wife. We've been together for 32 years now. Saw her at a record store one day, Wizard Records, where I hung out all the time with my friend Jack and all the people who worked at the record store. And I would just stand there and we would talk about whatever and listen to the new records that came out. And maybe I would buy something. But this one Saturday afternoon, this incredibly beautiful girl came in and was shopping. And I know this sounds corny, but I said to my friend Jack, I was like, Jack, do you know who that girl is? And he's like, no, she comes in every once in a while. I don't know who she is. I was like, I think that's the girl I'm going to marry. And I followed her out of the store and trailed her to another couple of places and then lost her when she entered campus area and went down the sorority row street. I was hanging back a decent distance to not be discovered. And by the time I got to the corner, she was gone. I found out later she was in a sorority, which was not something that I was very familiar with. The punk rock kids at that time did not hang with the fraternity types because we were dirty punk rockers. Then Nirvana happened. And of course, every frat had to have their punk band. And the band that I got in after Reflexive Repetition was the resident band for the Pike fraternity. Played with the Dead Milkmen at one of their big summer parties. And in 1993, my then girlfriend, now wife, we both packed up and moved to New York City. She was going to go to NYU to get her master's in nutrition, and I was going to be on exchange to Hunter College in New York City. That year was interesting. As an exchange student in this program, we got to do a lot of things around the city, go to Broadway plays and museums and all that sort of thing. The biggest thing that I remember about being a student at Hunter College was taking a writing course, and my writing teacher was a recently graduated MFA named Alice Sebold. If you recognize that name, you'll know that she wrote The Lovely Bones later and became pretty well known. But she also assigned as reading Raymond Carver. Not long after we moved there, I started to play in an open mic at a place called the Sidewalk Cafe. And from there, I started a band that was ultimately called Star City. Star City was lucky enough to play a bunch of shows, opening up for a lot of bands that became better known in subsequent years. We opened for the Old 97s, Drive By Truckers, a bunch of other bands, and got to go on tour. We made 2 records. We did relatively well. When we first started out, we had some major label interest, but bass player and guitar player left the band right before our official showcase for the head of A&R at A&M Records was going to happen. We were also on the bill with the guys from Wilco, everyone except Jeff Tweedy on that bill. And that's where I met Jay Bennett, who plays a big role in my career in a few years. Having those 2 guys leave the band was another big learning moment for me, but I don't think I learned the lesson until many years later. We had just gotten a show booked at CMJ, which is the College Music Journal, which they had a big festival all across New York City every year, and we were going to play the Bloodshot Records barbecue that was going on the Saturday of CMJ. It was the same slot on that bill that the Old 97s had been in the year before, and since that time, the Old 97s had just signed a $1 million record deal, and I was excited. This is something that's happened to me a lot over the years. I have had brushes with success, haven't always felt like I belonged there, and a confluence of different things have come to pass that let that success slip away. At least some people would say, hey, going to New York, starting a band, getting good gigs, and getting a major label or 2 interested in you is success. But I wanted to write songs as my job. I wanted to travel and make money and play in front of people all over the place. We did get to tour some. We went over to the UK and played some. Our first record did relatively well for an independent release, and that was enough to pay for us to go into the studio for our second record. But we spent a lot more money than we had that we expected to spend, and that would lead me to something else that's fun about living a life as a creator a few years away from that. But Star City was the best musical experience that I'd had up to that point. When those two guys left, what we should have done was just said, hey, cool, totally understand. You didn't get into this to get signed to a major label. You have other things going on in your life. Totally get it. Play this show with us, and then we'll take it from there. We'll figure it out. But didn't do that. Myself and the drummer, Errol, both of us, I think, were just completely shell-shocked and couldn't think of how to respond. And so we got two of our other friends to fill in, and it just didn't have the same feel. And the show didn't go well. And the record deal never came, at least not at that point. So it was what it was. And as the years went on, Star City started to do better, and we got better and better players until there were no original members of the band left but me. Everybody in the band was a good friend and is still a very good friend. And we made some really good music I'm super proud of. And again, we had an opportunity to get signed to a label in the UK. We had an entertainment lawyer whose major client was Bruce Springsteen, and he had represented Sonic Youth. And a little known fact, entertainment lawyers are the ones who really do the negotiating of the record deals. They have the connections with the A&R people and the executives and all this other stuff. So it was kind of his job to shop our stuff around, and nothing really ever came of that. But we did get offered a deal. Ultimately, that deal fell through because in 2000, we started recording our second record. We recorded in Mission Studios in New York, and that studio has one of the best mixing boards I've ever had the pleasure of meeting. It's a Neve board from Air Studios London that Oliver, the guy who runs Mission Sound, purchased and had brought over. He had it restored, and I never recorded digital anything until after I left New York, really. Everything that I did in New York was all 2-inch tape, 24-track, old school recording. That's what I learned on, because I learned to record while working in these other studios. Our first record, we worked at a studio called Coyote Studios, and bands like the Bottle Rockets and others had done their recording there. That's where I really learned how to record in many ways. I learned how to sing on a recording in that studio after listening back to tracks from day one of our sessions and hearing myself say, just like belting stuff out loud as I possibly could, because that's the way you have to sing in a live setting. The engineer, at the end of the night, we were having some beers and stuff, put on Tom Petty's Wallflowers record. And he said, listen to the way he's singing. And I heard it. Just a softness to it, letting the mic do the work. And that was something that had never struck me before. And I don't think I ever sang the same again after that. I can thank Albert and Tom Petty for teaching me how to sing in the studio. Our second record came out. We were on tour. We went through St. Louis, Chicago, Nashville, North Carolina, bunch of other places. We'd been on tour that year, and the previous year I think we'd done 3 short tours, and we were supposed to start a new tour with a band called Slobberbone starting September 12th of 2001. And you can probably figure out where this is going. The night before, we were supposed to rehearse with the folks who were playing with us on that tour because our rhythm section couldn't go on that particular tour. And then 9/11 happened and changed everything for everybody. Especially if you lived in New York or something, especially if you lived in New York. Taking nothing away from the folks in Pennsylvania, the folks in D.C. at the Pentagon. Life in New York was never the same again, and I was never the same again. Coming out of that, Star City, we just couldn't recover. We had released our record. We had a very limited budget to promote it. We were lucky enough to have Tracy Thomas, who's now Jason Isbell's manager, working promotion for us. And nobody, from September 11th all the way through to the holiday season, nobody was thinking about anything. Nobody was buying new music. Nobody was doing anything. We had to cancel our tour, and Star City just never really recovered from that. So by 2003-ish, Star City had gone on extended hiatus, which I guess it's still on extended hiatus. I also convinced my job at the time to eliminate my position and give me a severance package, and that would allow me to also collect unemployment. Again, I think if you lived in New York City at that time, I think it was a city that collectively was undergoing a whole lot of post-traumatic stress. And I don't know if my decision-making processes over the years have ever really gone back to normal, but I wanted to give the songwriting thing a concerted, full-time effort. So I bought a small Zoom recording box that had 8 tracks and a couple of microphones, an Audio-Technica AT4040 and an AKG 3000, 2000. Anyway, and every day for the next 9 months, I would go down in my little closet studio in our apartment and I would work on songs. And then I would come up for lunch, go down and work a little bit more. And by mid-afternoon, I would play some Tiger Woods golf on the PlayStation and then meet my wife for dinner. That was my 2002/2003. Around that time, my wife and I were also trying to get pregnant. We were in our 30s. It was just time. I had said I didn't want to have a kid until my career got off the ground, and you never really know what time that is once you really get into it. And so we discovered that we couldn't have kids naturally, so we ended up getting IVF. Second round of treatments, the way that they get you ready for IVF, would get the female ready for IVF, is they jack your hormones to the sky. They get into pills and injections and all kinds of stuff to just get your body to produce as many eggs at one time as it possibly can. And it may be different now, but this was 20 years ago. And so the first time, it didn't work. We got no eggs. The second time, they gave my wife the amount of hormones that they would give someone 10 years older than her to get this going. And we were fortunate enough to get 3 eggs, 2 of which we were able to fertilize. And let me tell you, there's certain things about living in New York City that are challenging to your dignity. And there are certain things about the process of IVF that are challenging to your dignity. One of which is, in order to see who it was that was having the trouble getting pregnant, I had to see if my sperm were swimming. So I had to produce a sample of sperm at home. I had to take it up to the Upper East Side, like around 70th Street, which meant that I had to ride on the subway for about 45 minutes to an hour with a plastic cup filled with semen in my armpit, just sort of holding it like this, because you have to keep body temperature or the sperm will die. Anyway, my guys were swimming, and so that's how that all got going on. But then when you get in for the IVF treatment, New York City is also a place that's challenged for real estate. And our doctor's office was in an old brownstone near Central Park, 68th or 69th Street, on the east side of Central Park. The only space that they had for the males to go to produce their sample for the IVF treatment was a little space underneath the stairs that was a closet, and it had accordion plastic doors that you could pull shut and latch. And then they had, like a little TV for some porn or some magazines. But the nurse's station was right outside that door. So anyway, second time we were successful. And around that time, I had written my songs and I had arranged to do some recording with Jay Bennett, who had recently been kicked out of Wilco and was starting his own studio and doing some production for other artists. So I went to Chicago to work with Jay for a week. And Jay Bennett, who has passed, and God rest his soul, etc., was maybe the only person I've ever met that I would stick the genius label on and it not be hyperbole. Jay could do anything. He heard music in a way that I couldn't, that just seemed so quintessentially Jay and so natural, but at the same time he had a reserve to him that you didn't hear on his records. But when I went out there, I spent 5 days recording, and it was just me and Jay. We brought a drummer in to do basic tracks, so me and the drummer played the basic tracks for the 5 songs we were doing, and then the rest of the time it was just me and Jay, and we would layer stuff on as we were going. And we got 2 or 3 days into the recording, and Jay had yet to play anything on anything. It was just I was playing everything, to the point where I was just like, hey, feel free anytime you hear something, jump in, play. Would love to have you play something. And he kind of just stopped and he said, I know that when people come out here and they want to work with me, maybe the expectation is, that I'm just gonna do my thing and Wilco all over their songs, but I want to get the songs that you have out of you. You can do this. You have it in your head. You have all of this stuff available to you. And when I hear a place for me to jump in and add something, I'll do it. But don't doubt yourself. Go ahead and trust your instincts and do what it is that you feel like you need to do to make these songs what you want them to be. I had never felt that feeling of like, I actually am in control of this. Nobody else's name or performances on top of mine really are necessary for me to express myself. Jay, one night we would start working around 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and then we would finish working about 2 or 3 in the morning, and I would go off to bed. And one night Jay stayed up all night, and I woke up at noon the next day, and he was still in the control room working on bass parts for a song. And he says to me, as he's like kind of getting up from the chair and he's dazed and overly tired, and he'd been up for almost 48 hours. He said, I did 3 bass parts here. I did one that's really simple. I did the one that's in the middle. I did one that was like really all over the place. Listen down to them and decide which one you want. I gotta go sleep. And then he slept for a day and a half. And I was on the clock. I needed to do something. So I did a little bit of recording of things here and there. And eventually we got back on track and got everything finished. The hope was in doing that record that we could do 5 songs that would be kind of the demos for what would hopefully be a full record, and hopefully get it picked up someplace. But ultimately that didn't happen. Jay had his own struggles, and it made it difficult to get some of the work done. And my wife and I were then pregnant with my daughter, and my dad passed away in January of 2003. Things just were, New York was not doing it for us. We had moved to Staten Island when we knew that we were going to have our daughter, and Staten Island is a beautiful place in some parts, but not a place that we really enjoyed living too much. So we decided to go back home to West Virginia and be around my family and closer to my wife's family. And we packed up in New York, and we drove ourselves down to West Virginia. And at that point, I really didn't know what I was going to do. I still wanted to make music, but I didn't have a band, and I was no longer in New York. Just felt like I was kind of at loose ends. So my wife says to me, you've got to figure out what it is that you want to do next, because you can't sit here like this for the rest of your life and wonder like why things didn't happen, and you just have to move on to the next thing. Around that same time, I had put a lot of the band's debt for touring and for finishing our record on my credit cards, because we were in talks with this label in England, and one of the stipulations of the contract was that they would pay me back for money I had spent. But that contract after 9/11 just went away. Just never really got further off the ground than the initial offer and our sort of counter offer. I was saddled with thousands of dollars of debt and no way to pay it, because in leaving New York, both my wife and I's incomes, I was working as an editor. She was working as a nutritionist, and then later as a program director for the United Way. Both of our incomes were cut in half. I was working at the newspaper that I delivered as a kid on the copy editor's desk, and my wife was working at a hospital again after, so a bunch of years working in nonprofit. So I declared bankruptcy, and all of those things coming together, that was one of the lower times in my life where no career, bankruptcy, what do? I had never finished my undergraduate degree. Long story short, I didn't have all the credits that I needed, and I decided to go back to school to become a high school English teacher or something like that. And in doing that, I thought maybe it's time to make the creative thing a sideline and do a job where I won't hate myself every day waking up, and sort of settle into the beginnings of middle age. I took an art history course, and I took what they called a senior seminar with one of the fiction writing Masters of Fine Arts students at West Virginia. And I ended up writing what was really 50 pages of a novel. And again, 2/3 of the way through the semester, the student that I was working with was like, hey, have you ever thought about getting an MFA in writing? I had a friend who had gone to the writer's workshop at University of Iowa, which is famous, and I was jealous. And I thought if he could get in, I could get in. But little did I know that they get 1,000 to 1,500 applications per year for 25 spots in the fiction program. So the odds are not good of getting in. But I decided to get an MFA because one thing I didn't know about Masters of Fine Arts is it's considered a terminal degree. And instead of only being able to teach like primary, secondary education, you have the ability to teach college classes if you get a terminal degree. So I sent my application out to Iowa because their deadline was earlier. I didn't really think I would get in. My wife and I even bought a house in between. I sent an application to West Virginia's MFA program, figured I'd get in there. That was a 3-year program. Iowa's a 2-year program. And I would just do something and then I'd teach like English 101. I just figured I'd teach English 101 and start going from there. Well, Iowa called and said, "Hey, you got in." And I thought that it was a joke because the person who called me was not a name that I recognized at the time. But I looked, and that person was actually the executive secretary for the program. The director of the program had passed away earlier in the year, so she was making all the phone calls, and that's how I got to Iowa. If you're not familiar with the Iowa Writers Workshop, it has graduated 30 plus Pulitzer Prize winners in the fiction department. 2 of the staff were MacArthur Genius Grant Award winners, and Jim McPherson and Marilyn Robinson. It's the oldest graduate writing program in the world, the first graduate writing program in the world, I should say. And getting into that program is not something that just, it's harder to get into than Harvard Law School. So it was another moment of transformation for me as a writer. I came out to Iowa with the 50 pages that I had written for the novel that would take me another 8 years to finish. And as a reader and a writer, I had always felt like there was another level of writing that other writers had access to, the great writers but I couldn't put words to it. I didn't know how it was that you would access that. I didn't know what it was. And my first workshop at Iowa, the first week that I was there in school, was my first lesson in what that next level was. I got just eviscerated. An hour and 45 minutes of complete and utter destruction of the 50 pages that I had sent in. And I'll tell the longer story at some other time. But that's where I really started to see this other tier that was obscured before. After I graduated, taught at a few different schools, and was the director of a writing program for the College of Medicine at the University of Iowa, finished my novel, wrote some songs to go along with the novel, released the novel, and along the way I quit drinking because all through these years I was a social drinker, then I was a drinker that was social, and then I just became a drinker. And it got to the point where it was taking over my life. So I quit, and that was yet another incredibly difficult thing because I didn't know how to live, how to be in the world without alcohol. Just didn't know. And I had used alcohol as a crutch for so long that I'd never developed my own real personality in the world. That's kind of what led me to YouTube. 2013-ish, I started making YouTube videos about gaming headsets that I was trying out because I wanted to play some video games. I had a lot more free time on my hands since I wasn't drinking, and my friend Curtis had gotten a PS4 and I got a PS4, and so I started trying to get a gaming headset because I'd never had one before, but I needed one to talk to Curtis. And the first one I got was terrible, so I made a review, took it back, got another one. And that's kind of what started me down this YouTube road. So 2010, I was 33 and newly sober, foster parent, the very difficult older foster child. So YouTube kind of became my escape. At first, I didn't really care too much about it one way or the other. It was just fun. And then people started watching the videos and they would either love that I was trashing things and agree with me, or they would get mad at me for trashing the thing that they loved. And it continued on from there. 2016, 2017, I started taking YouTube a lot more seriously, making 3 videos a week for about a year and a half. And in 2017 to 2018, suddenly my channel just kind of blew up. It went from 35 or 40,000 subscribers to 125,000 subscribers. And by the middle of 2019, I was ready to leave my full-time job that I'd had for 10 years and make a go at making my living as an artist, as a creator for the first time, full-time, with no net out there. And so I quit my job. And on October 25th, my birthday, 2019, I left that job for the last time. And that was the beginning of my full-time content creator career. A couple of months later, COVID happens. And the tenor of everything in the world changed. And so the feeling that I had about, what I was doing on YouTube and everything like that changed. And I've spent the last bunch of years making my living on YouTube, sometimes making really good money, sometimes not making enough, but I've made it work. Most I've ever gotten paid for a month of AdSense was $12,000+ for, and that was the month that I had a video about the iPhone 11 go over 1 million views, and the views have gone down. The channel has stagnated. I've tried to figure out what to do. I've hemmed and hawed and never really got off the pot about doing anything differently until recently. And part of it has a lot to do with, I turned 50 a year and a half ago, and that really does change the way that you think about the shape of your life. And the videos that I was making on YouTube before were sort of irreverent and sort of poke the bear and make people angry kind of videos. I just didn't have that in me anymore. What I did have, and what I hope to offer on YouTube from now on, is the breadth of the experience that I have, the knowledge that I've gained over the years of tech, as well as creativity and how to live a creative life for 50+ years, how to make money when you don't have any way to make money. It's all on you, and whether or not making money even matters all that much. I've never been somebody really driven by money. I would love to have money, but I'm not willing to sacrifice the things that I value in what my creative life is and who I am as a creator in order to make money. And that distinction has never been more stark than my experiences on YouTube, which has put me in contact with a much wider breadth of people. Different kinds of people who are all doing generally the same thing. When I was a musician, I was pretty much with other musicians, and we pretty much all had the same ideas about what was important. So I've learned a lot about myself, and I've learned a lot about YouTube as a platform and how you can exist in it different ways, and what kind of strength you have to have inside of you to be able to continue to do it. And I'm hoping that as I get into this next phase of my YouTube career, that's what I'm going to offer, is the benefit of my experience starting something like YouTube late, building a 200,000+ channel, having ups and downs with it, but continuing to soldier on and soldier through and learn how to be yet another new kind of creator, and taking all the things that I've learned from all the different lives that I've lived and bringing them to bear on this platform, and fighting my worst and most present enemy, myself and my own self-doubt. That has knocked me down more times in the past 2 years or 3 years than anything else. But now I'm aware of it. I can see it, and I want to fix it. So if you're somebody who's a little bit older, or even if you're somebody who is a little bit younger, and you're looking at finding a way to live a creative life and to make it sustainable, that's something I've been able to do for these 52 years. So hopefully you'll hang out with me and take in the videos, ask me questions down in the comments, hit the subscribe button and bell notify yourself if you want to keep up with videos as they go, and we'll just keep rolling on this thing. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for allowing me to sort of ramble through my life and how I got here as a full-time YouTube creator, content creator at 52 years old. I hope I'm going to see you again sometime soon. Introduce yourself down in the comments and let me know what questions you might have that I might be able to answer. Till the next time, I'm out.